Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of Parliamentary Conversations in the Commonwealth, a new podcast from the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, better known as the CPA. The CPA promotes knowledge of the constitutional, legislative, economic, social and cultural aspects of parliamentary democracy, and supports parliamentarians across the Commonwealth to strengthen their democracies, to uphold the rule of law and to safeguard human rights. We're launching this podcast to have an open discussion about parliaments and democracy, with parliamentarians and experts across the Commonwealth who are working towards the common goal of healthy democracies, good governance and human rights. I'm Tom Davis, and on today's episode, we'll be marking Kwibuka, the annual day of commemoration of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. Each year, on the 7th of April, Rwandans begin a 100-day period of national mourning to commemorate the estimated 800,000 people who were killed during a campaign of violence carried out by Hutu extremists from April to July of 1994. Today, we'll be reflecting on the genocide in Rwanda and asking what parliamentary democracies can do to remember the victims of genocide and commit to the promise of never again. First on the podcast today is Lieutenant General the Honourable Roméo Dallaire. Lieutenant General Dallaire was Force Commander of the United Nations Assistance Mission for Rwanda prior to and during the 1994 genocide. He provided the United Nations with information about the planned massacre, but was denied the permission to intervene. When he was ordered to withdraw when fighting began, he disobeyed orders, remaining in Rwanda with a small contingent of soldiers who tried to protect those seeking refuge. Since being medically released from the Canadian Army in 2000 on account of the post-traumatic stress disorder he suffered after he left Rwanda, Lieutenant General Dallaire has committed his life to peace-building and human rights advocacy. He is the founder of the Dallaire Institute for Children, Peace and Security, a former Canadian senator, and a respected government and United Nations advisor. For General Dallaire, Kwibuka has a very personal meaning.
It is, to me, similar to the 11th of November. That was for my dad, who served in the Army 1920, joined in 1929, did 6 years overseas, married a Dutch girl. I was born there. And that day to him was a particular day, of course, of remembrance and reliving the day. So it wasn't, and the 7th of April was not a happy day in any way, shape, or form. On the contrary, it's an opportunity for our minds to grab hold of us and to bring back all the memories in digitally clear vision and slow motion. And so we tend to relive what happened. And that reliving is difficult at any time. Commemorative times, like every 5 years or so on, I get with my now left 11 officers that had finally joined me from Canada. One of them has killed himself with suicide not too long ago, and we commiserate on what we lived, and we sort of pledge informally that we don't let that genocide die.
Despite the emotional difficulty that these annual commemorations hold for General Dallaire, he believes that remembrance is vitally important not only to heal the wounds of the past, but also as a first step in preventing genocides of the future.
You see, the whole essence of remembering is to assist us in reconciliation. Remembering is not an instrument by which you pursue the frictions that led to the atrocities or to the catastrophic scenarios that ended up happening. Remembering is extracting from that how one moves into the future and how one builds the future through particularly reconciliation, because one of the greatest prevention tools for a recurrence, which we're always fearful of, a recurrence of mass atrocities, genocide, of conflict, is the inability for people to reconcile inability to sustain an effort of reconciliation that ultimately leads to nearly erasing the frictions that originally were there that created this scenario in the first place. So it's very, very, very important that one looks at commemoration times as instruments of reconciliation and not instruments of keeping alive the suffering, the separation, and the catastrophe in the most pejorative ways.
Now, later on, we'll hear more about how those within Rwanda use commemoration as a tool of reconciliation and genocide prevention. But as General Dallaire explained, remembrance of the victims of genocide must not be limited to just the countries which have suffered through such traumatic violence. The international community also has a responsibility to remember victims and to act to ensure such atrocities cannot happen again.
Let's put the onus where I believe it should really be. And those are the people who represent the populations of each country. It is my belief that the political elites of those nations have the fundamental responsibility to bring forward elements that are of such enormous significance to humanity. And one of the tools I think is absolutely critical in ensuring the continuity of the remembrance and the errors of the past being rectified, and that we progress to a new level of sense of humanity, is parliamentarians, is those who are actually elected to represent a whole bunch of people. And collectively, they represent the nations. And so I feel that the onus is very much on those being elected at national level to be held accountable for the international engagement of their nations. And so that's the ultimate objective, is that the world parliamentarians who represent humanity in nearly all the nations that have a democratic or an elected process, that they coalesce into a body politic that can significantly influence the flow of decision-making that's done by the executive of their nations and the international institutions like the UN.
In urging parliamentarians to take action against genocide, General Dallaire was quick to challenge the idea that dealing with conflicts elsewhere in the world is not in the interest of a parliamentarian and their local constituents.
There is a need for parliamentarians to monitor, to engage, to be aware, to hold the executives of their countries accountable for their foreign policies in regards to preventing conflicts in the world, because they do have a direct impact on our self-interest, from diasporas to economy to natural resources availability to ultimately seeing their borders being smothered by refugees and illegal immigration, and ultimately opening the door to terrorism, because the rage in those countries that are going through the friction goes well beyond their borders. And so we are entering an era of much more vulnerability than people think. And that's why it is, to me, essential that parliamentarians be educated. I'm going to use that term, it's very pretentious. Not just being aware, being fundamentally educated on the threats that frictions in these countries will not only create massive humanitarian catastrophes, but they do have an impact on us directly.
When it comes to delivering on the promise of never again, General Dallaire remains hopeful that through education and focused, coordinated action, parliamentarians can make a meaningful contribution to genocide prevention in their parliaments and around the world.
I do believe that creating structured focal points with this very deliberate objective in mind, to inform, educate, keep current all the legislators, all the parliamentarians on subjects that we have just been discussing, and doing it in such a fashion by bringing in speakers, by providing memoranda and subject matters to different committees, by holding some committees very much engaged on their agendas with the executive of the nation. I truly believe that you can create nucleuses in different countries that can ultimately coalesce to influence the executives of their nations.
As he reflects on the legacy of genocide in Rwanda at this time of commemoration, General Dallaire believes that there are lessons to be learned not only from what went wrong in the lead up to the genocide in Rwanda, but also about what has gone right in the years since.
I'm very, very positive about how they've shifted their security forces to becoming a world leader in peacekeeping on their continent and beyond. And in so doing are educating and indoctrinating and providing new tools for the use of security forces, not only beyond their borders, but inside their borders, because that experience from outside, they're bringing it back home. The second element that came out of that was, of course, the gachachas and the reconciliation attempts through justice. The seeing of justice, real justice, locally, and that happens, that's still an absolute. Justice is still one of the few absolutes in the world. Love is, justice is. So that's the second part of the exercise. The third one was that the political elites of the nation be held in a firm grip of leadership that keeps them focused on the nation and building the nation and not building their personal power base. The other one, which is pervasive, is educate, educate, educate. But objective education, not necessarily religious-based, not necessarily one philosophy against another. Objective, rigorous, intellectual education.
Next on the podcast today is someone who has been a leader in the education of young Rwandans since the genocide, the Rwandan MP Honourable Emma Furaha Rubagumya. Honourable Rubagumya was elected to Parliament in 2018 after a 20-year career in education, particularly focusing on girls' access to education. She is chairperson of the CPA Rwanda Branch Executive Committee and chairs the Political and Gender Equality Committee in the Rwandan Chamber of Deputies. For her, Kwibuka is an opportunity to remember loved ones, to heal, and to recommit to the prevention of future genocides.
So personally, Kwibuka, or remember, means to give the dignity to our beloved ones, innocent women, men, youth, and children who were killed in 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. It also reminds me that I and all human beings should play every role possible to make sure that genocide will never happen again anywhere in the world, that we should join efforts to fight genocide, ideology, and related crimes. Kwibuka, remembering, also contribute to the healing process of genocide against Tutsi survivors, but also to the whole nation, because it reminds us how horrible bad leadership can ruin the country. So, as leaders, we are ever cognizant to uphold values of good leadership and democracy.
This year, the Kwibuka commemorations that Honourable Rubagumya and her fellow parliamentarians will be participating in will be slightly different due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
We are commemorating in difficult times when COVID-19 pandemic has posed challenges and restrictions such that we will not be able to commemorate in ways we used. But thanks to technology, we are going to use media and other technology-assisted means to raise awareness through different forums in form of public lectures, talk shows, and other means available. We are also going to visit memorial sites where possible, but this is going to be very restricted. As I said, it is in the period of COVID pandemic, so it's not possible to do it the way we used to do before. We are also going to participate in commemoration in different ways using online platforms. Since this is a second time we are doing it in this kind of condition, we have experience of what we did last year. We are going to build on means and ways that we used to commemorate last year and do the same and probably more improved because we have gained the experience this year.
Honourable Rubagumya is one of 59 women members of the Rwandan Parliament, and Rwanda has the highest percentage of women parliamentarians anywhere in the world. For her, the empowerment of women in post-genocide Rwanda has been absolutely central to the national rebuilding project.
It wouldn't have been possible to achieve unity and reconciliation at this level within 27 years if we had excluded women in the process. It should be noted well that women form a bigger percentage of Rwandan population, and they have been terribly affected by genocide. Many of them, if not all, had and still have wounds of different forms, some physical wounds and many more psychological wounds. There are many widows and orphans that were left nowhere. It was therefore imperative that they are included and empowered to live and contribute to the growth of the country. Secondly, empowering women in all facets, be it economically, socially, politically, has brought in a new touch in ways business is conducted here. And I believe it is an undeniable ingredient into many achievements that Rwanda has registered since 1994. In Parliament, we have more than 50%, slightly above 50% in cabinet, and it is like that in all other areas, in judiciary, in executive positions, and that shows a will to empower women and have them in decision-making position.
Alongside the empowerment of women, another key element of the rebuilding process has been reforming the political centralism and top-down approach to governance that ultimately contributed to the genocide. According to Dr. Joseph Ryarasa Nkurunziza, Executive Director of Never Again Rwanda, a Kigali-based peacebuilding and social justice NGO, a wide range of mechanisms have helped integrate citizens into the decision-making process.
There is the transitional justice, whereby it was essential to make sure that citizens receive justice. If they had used the classical justice, it would have taken years. People have reconciled. The survivors got to know where their beloved ones were dumped, and they were reburied in dignity. Society got to know how the genocide was organized. So all those outcomes of the transitional justice. And of course, there is also umuganda. Umuganda, it's the community, the community work that is always done at the end of every month. This contributed to the fact that people had returned from the diaspora. No one knew each other. So it contributed to social cohesion, and also utilizing people's different efforts and energy to contribute to national reconstruction. But also during the Umuganda, it gives space to the citizens so that they can be able to talk about issues that affect them within their communities. And from the Umuganda, they pick issues that go to the cell, the sector, and the district. So it is also one way to engage citizens and in a sort of problem solving. There is also citizens assemble, whereby every Wednesday, where citizens at the village level and also the cell meet and try to meet with their local leaders and try to discuss on issues. So this is a mechanism that contributes towards empowering citizens, but also trying to demonstrate that there is need to consult citizens from the bottom to the central level, not top bottom, but bottom up. So those are some of the approaches that have been put in place to strengthen the governance approach in Rwanda, but also to try and make sure that political centralism is reducing.
For Dr. Nkurunziza, citizen participation in governance is absolutely vital to facilitate peaceful cohabitation and to foster a more inclusive and robust society.
There is need to make sure that citizens are part and parcel of the policy process. Some of the issues that led to bad governance is just because it was just a particular group of people that would make decisions for the majority of the population in the past. That's before the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. When it comes to rebuilding a failed state, most especially for the case of Rwanda after the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, in order to make sure that things go hand in hand with the vision in the place, you need citizens to be part and parcel of the process. So rebuilding can't be done by a particular group of people. Rebuilding has to include each and every citizen. So that's why expanding citizen participation in governance is so important when it comes to nation building, so that rebuilding can be effective, rebuilding can be sustainable, and rebuilding can live from one generation to another.
To bridge the gap between communities and decision makers, and to encourage responsive, transparent and accountable government, Never Again Rwanda has set up citizens' forums in districts across the country. They give a platform for communities to raise local concerns, to maintain a dialogue with leaders, and to learn about their right to contribute to governance.
We wanted to have an empowered citizenry that when they go to these state-sponsored spaces, or even the existing spaces and forums, they need to participate meaningfully. So we had to take through the members of these citizen forums, take them through a process so that they can understand that it is their responsibility, it is their right to contribute, it is their right to hold citizens accountable. Because most especially in any society that has had genocide, of course, you find there a trauma. You find there fear of unknown. So in order to, and maybe self-censorship. So in order to have meaningful participation, you need a healed society. You need a society that moves from self-censorship. So it is a process. And that process has to go hand in hand with some capacity building. So these forums, we try to empower citizens with skills in articulating their issues, in how to amalgamate those issues, look at those issues with what is more urgent, what is more important, what is not important. Then how do they engage their local leaders to be able to address those issues?
Across the Commonwealth, non-governmental organisations like Never Again Rwanda are working to bring an end to mass atrocities through community programmes, educational outreach, atrocity prevention training, research, advocacy, and a whole host of other techniques. In the United Kingdom, Protection Approaches was set up in 2014 to address the diverse challenges of identity-based violence, from hate crime to violent extremism and genocide. They work to strengthen prediction, prevention and protection approaches to identity-based violence both in the UK and worldwide. Protection Approaches has called on the UK government to adopt a national strategy on atrocity prevention. According to the organisation's co-executive director, Dr. Kate Ferguson, national strategies can help to make sure governments are considering exactly how their decisions might contribute to the risk of mass atrocities.
Thinking about how to prevent atrocities might seem like an extraordinarily difficult task to do. But at its most simple, it means thinking about how your decisions contribute to the vulnerabilities of populations. Does this decision make this population more at risk or less at risk? And that decision might be around, your trade policy. In brokering this deal in Cameroon over a pipeline, where we know that there is already a resource-based tensions and conflict around which identity, manipulation of identities is leading to violence. Is this the right thing to do? If you have an atrocity prevention strategy or a framework of thinking, it is somebody's job to make that assessment. Now, it is a political decision whether you act on that assessment or not. But not to have that assessment means that you are making decisions without knowing whether you are complicit in or accidentally enabling the propellants of the gravest crimes imaginable. And so what we've been calling for is for it to be somebody's job, probably more than one, let's be honest, to think about where those risks are, where there might be accidentally or intentionally kind of contributing to those drivers that make violence more likely. And then there is some assessment.
Protection Approaches and other organisations in the UK Atrocity Prevention Working Group have worked closely with the Foreign Affairs Committee in the UK Parliament to hold the government to account on its atrocity prevention policy. For Dr. Ferguson, collaboration and knowledge sharing between MPs and civil society organisations through the process of parliamentary committees has proved to be an effective way to influence UK atrocity prevention policy.
I think in the United Kingdom, I think the role that is played by our parliamentary committees is just extraordinary. And I think that they continue to be an undervalued component of our parliamentary process. I just think that the work they do, the number of inquiries that sort of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee has managed to undertake in the last year alone, I just think it's extraordinary.
It's not just governments, however, that must be held to account for their approach to atrocity prevention. Political parties can also develop clear policies on atrocity prevention and create structures within their party to deal with this issue.
It can't just be left for the government to kind of push forward. And political parties, they can create spokespeople within their front bench to have a portfolio on atrocity prevention. All political parties in the world should have someone whose job it is to do that thinking. They can also make those clear policy commitments themselves. You need to make it clear that atrocity prevention is part of your vision for foreign policy. The last thing that they can do, well, not the last thing, there's hundreds of things they can do. The last thing I will say here that they can do is undertake training. No, this is a tough area to think about. And when you use words like genocide or ethnic cleansing or mass atrocity, it understandably makes politicians wary. They're complex terms. They are both emotive and have legal implications. But actually, like most things, when you break them down, they are easier to understand. They are digestible. You can recognize how small changes, like looking at supply chains, can make an enormous difference. But there are sort of There are all of these environments where you can upskill and develop.
So we began today with the question of what parliamentary democracies can do to remember victims of genocide and prevent future genocides. We've heard from General Dallaire about the importance of commemoration as the first step in both healing and prevention. We've heard from Honourable Rubagumya about what Rwandan MPs are doing to remember victims this year during COVID-19. And we've heard from Dr. Nkurunziza about how important citizen participation is to prevent a recurrence of genocide in Rwanda. Let's conclude now with a list of specific actions that Dr. Ferguson has compiled for MPs who are elected to represent us that can make a genuine contribution to atrocity prevention in parliamentary democracies across the Commonwealth.
Top of my wish list is to recognise that these issues are not black and white. They are nuanced. And those that have the most experience in thinking about how best to sort of protect lives recognize that there are often, no good answers. There are just less bad options. The second is to work cross-party, to talk to colleagues, that might sit on different sides of the political spectrum, but that have a shared point of kind of interest and view, that they also see this as grey. The third is to kind of be humble, and take some training. There are some incredible options out there that can really build that skill base and that knowledge base, so you have the confidence to talk confidently about what are complex issues. And, so many MPs that I talk to want to do more, but their parties don't have established positions. And to speak about these issues means that they would kind of be seen as falling out of line because the issue is it scares off the leadership, essentially. And that is the opposite of political leadership. To round it off, maybe sort of measuring my expectations, ask your party leader what the party position on these things are. What is the position on what's happening, in Ethiopia, what's happening in Myanmar, what's happening in Xinjiang, what's happening in Venezuela, what's happening in Hungary? Sort of ask those questions. Ask, what the position is on atrocity prevention, because if you ask, then someone thinks about it. Step forward and say, I'd like to take this brief.
And with that call to action, we come to the end of the first ever episode of Parliamentary Conversations in the Commonwealth from the CPA. Thank you to all our guests for taking the time to come on the show. Now, to find out more about the work of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, visit our website at www.cpahq.org or follow the links in the podcast description. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favourite podcasting platform to stay up to date with our latest episodes. And all that's left to say is thank you very much for listening.